The rise of the internet has had one of the biggest impacts on the music industry, changing the very way we now listen to music and allowing more unique and refreshing ideas to flourish online and reach the mainstream. Artists from the likes of 100 gecs to Tyler the Creator owe a lot to how the internet gave them a platform for popularity, and one of the genres that has hugely changed thanks to it is breakcore. During the 2000s and 2010s, this offshoot of jungle and drum and bass, characterised by its drum breaks and fast speeds, was fairly underground, only represented to wider audiences by a few standout artists. But nowadays you can find breakcore playlists and compilations with millions of views, and whether you like it or not, one person gets a lot of the credit. It was in 2020 when a previously unknown Australian artist took the YouTube algorithm by storm. Her name was Sewerslvt, and her new style of atmospheric hellscapes paired with energetic drum breaks resonated with hundreds of thousands of listeners. Despite leaving the internet only a year later, her music has gained incredible praise and still has a devoted cult following. But this is not a video where we discuss her discography. Over her time on the internet, Sewerslvt has been known as an incredibly divisive and controversial artist. She's been regularly criticised for her early provocative titles and album covers, as well as the handling of topics within her music, and even accusations as serious as grooming. It only took a year for it to gain hatred from every part of the online spectrum, from Twitter and TikTok users to the likes of Kiwi Farms and 4chan. Combine that all with a previously mentioned cult following, and the facts of the situation become rather hard to track. Until today, where we will be sifting through the files and setting the record straight. In this video there is information you may know, information you may have misjudged, and information you will see for the first time. This is Sewerslvt, a history of controversies. Even now, we don't know much about Sewerslvt's early life or identity in general, as she's remained mostly anonymous. The best place to start is in 2015, when Sewerslvt, age 15, would start posting videos online under the moniker of Sad Boy Sheldon. Though it's hard to come by these uploads since most of them have been wiped, archives do exist. At the time, she was a big fan of commentary YouTubers such as Leafy Is Here, Pyrocynical and iDubbbz, and her humour from then reflects that. She would only start getting into music after she joined Punk's Bakery, an online band of musicians that old Sewerslvt fans may be aware of, although barely any archives exist of this clique. One of the only sources for this is Person A former member of Punk's Bakery, who provided an anonymous testimony, backing up their claims with proof of previously lost album covers, complete archives of Sad Boy Sheldon's old music, and allegedly old DMs of Sewerslvt. Person A states that Sheldon joined Punk's Bakery in October 2015, after the band found a terrible fanfic about Jenny Wakeman from the cartoon My Life as a Teenage Robot. They decided to record an audiobook of it for laughs, and this is how Sheldon would find them. She decided to make crude animations for the audiobook, and from there she was invited to the Punk's Bakery Skype group. The group would start working on the next album in 2016, titled Crippling Depression Inc., with Sheldon starting to get into music production, and she had an instant talent for it. Within a few weeks, she had started producing mashups and gaining success. Her most popular video at this time, a Hotline Miami Death Grips mashup, would end up getting launched into the YouTube algorithm and getting over 2 million views, and down the line her mashups would also be featured in the videos of her idols, such as Pyrocynical. But not all that came from this era aged as well. Sewerslvt was also in charge of making the covers for the albums released into Punk's Bakery, with the aforementioned Crippling Depression Inc. having a parody of a Gorillaz album cover. This is relevant because it was a precursor to another album cover that she made whilst with Punk's Bakery, only this time it later became far more popular for all the wrong reasons. During this time, Person A also recalls that another member of the group was dating a girl who would doodle, and she drew a quick sketch of Sewerslvt's OC. This apparently made Sewerslvt obsessed with her, even though she was dating someone else, and according to Person A, that quick doodle was followed up by Sewerslvt sending her an unsolicited picture of her asshole. Thankfully, the girl handled it well, and the group made it into an inside joke known as the Sarlacc pit, but obviously that does sound like pretty weird behaviour, and Sewerslvt's alleged openness about their sexual nature is something that correlates with later public posts. Over the next couple of years, the Sad Boy Sheldon channel would bring in more views and subscribers, especially with the Death Grips and Hotline Miami mashups garnering a lot more attention. Yet despite this success, she was growing closer and closer to her own personal music. After all, from a creative standpoint, is there much personal pride in the success you gained of combining the works of others? In November 2017, the Sad Boy Sheldon channel would start to make the big switch to her new primary alias, Sewerslvt. In the early months of 2018, she would post the End of Trash posting, a 46-minute album containing all remaining mashups, and this would close the Sad Boy Sheldon chapter. Yet this change in name and style drastically affected Sewerslvt's behaviour and the people around her. Person A stated that over time, as Sad Boy Sheldon switched to Sewerslvt, she would start to become increasingly toxic and extremely edgy, to the point where it was hard to tell if she was being serious or not. As shown in DMs, Sewerslvt would often talk about other members of Punk's bakery, punching the walls of her shed until her knuckles were bloody, wanting to kill her mom with scissors, and trying to... There's even a statement here where she talks about and apparently admitting to killing 3 cats and eating the brain of one of them. Quote, "I've killed 3 cats now. Friendly cats who want some love and attention, and I take out my cookery and gut them like fish. They're just pests of society. No one will miss them. They are bought and replaced. I feel the same way about humans too. This was around May, I think. One in the Modbury area. The others I can't recall. Late at night, I choke the cats to death as an act of mercy. Then I became a soup of meat and fur. I only ate the brain because I didn't want to get toxoplasmosis. No one was around to stop me or witness the act, and the remains were dumped in a rubbish bag and into a sewer. If anyone saw it, they'd call it roadkill. Saddest thing is, I have a deep love for cats. I have one myself. They are the only pets I even like. But here I am. And worst of all, I'm ready to take this next level and kill my roommate. I'm so fucking sick of this and everything I've had to live with here. Also, know you've been telling the presses. I wonder how much more everyone hates the new me now. Now I know what you're thinking, this has to be fake. There's no way this is Sewerslvt, and I originally thought the same. Then I saw that Person A provided scrolling proof recordings of their DMs, including the ones we just read. Then, if that wasn't enough, Person A clicks on a link sent by Sewerslvt to a now private mashup. They click the Sad Boy Sheldon channel name, and it literally redirects to Sewerslvt's channel. So yeah, I'm pretty confident in saying that Sewerslvt did say what she said. I'm pretty confident in believing Person A. Soon after this, Sewerslvt and Punk's bakery would fall out, as Person A said, "For a long time we did try to help, but some people honestly don't want to be helped. After a while we moved from Skype to Discord. By mid to late 2017, people were tired of dealing with her. She simply wouldn't accept help, so what happens when we distance ourselves from her? She calls us all pedophiles and racists, and says she's glad she's leaving, or something like that. I was never a critical member, so I missed a lot of this, but I'm very familiar with it. Just wasn't there for it right as it was happening." Person A would also state that later down the line, when Sewerslvt had become more famous, she allegedly took away music opportunities from former members of Punk's bakery. The story goes that Sewerslvt and another musician were slated to attend the same virtual music festival, but Sewerslvt used her influence to get this person kicked off because she had a link to Punk's bakery's Bandcamp in her bio. With Sewerslvt now leaving Punk's bakery behind, she would start to try and make it on her own with a new style and solo career. And it was her empty and somber yet impactful music that resonated with a lot of new listeners and slowly built her a loyal fanbase. But that's not to say that she was having a peaceful time, because she was igniting a lot of controversy for various reasons. One of her most criticized actions is using the name Junko as a moniker or nickname. If you're not aware, this name is in reference to the case of Junko Furuta, a Japanese schoolgirl who was abducted, tortured, and sexually abused by 4 men for over a month before being murdered. It was a notoriously horrific case where the perpetrators were handed shockingly light sentences for the nature of their crimes. Many critics have since argued about the morality of Sewerslvt using the name of a victim of unspeakable abuse and repurposing it for a music project, essentially tying the name of Junko Furuta to the name Sewerslvt. Sewerslvt and her fans have made a defense of using Junko's name due to its emotional and artistic meaning, whilst to this day others think it's still incredibly distasteful and disrespectful. And those clashing arguments seem to be a theme when people discuss Sewerslvt's music. For example, one of the most recurring topics in Sewerslvt's music was the theme of alluded to in the titles of tracks or samples used in their songs. On Sewerslvt's first track on their first album released in 2017, the first thing you would have heard is a distressing sample of a child crying to 911 after having found their older sibling taking their own life. Already that's a pretty risky sample to put in, but then when you title the album Don't Be Afraid of Dying, that makes it look even worse, even if the intention was just a Hotline Miami reference. Other attempts include the track Nice Ways to Die, released in 2019, which originally featured an image taken by Rena Palankova, a 17-year-old girl who took her own life by lying in front of a train. This is again just kind of thrown in there, I guess to be edgy, and again to put it under the track Nice Ways to Die, it's just not very tasteful. Both of these tracks were taken down following backlash. Nice Ways to Die's original image was taken down shortly after release, whilst Don't Be Afraid of Dying's title track was taken down years after it was made, as it resurfaced as a point of criticism in 2019. This This backlash would thankfully teach Sewerslvt a lesson about putting the dead in her music, as things could have turned out much worse. As she admits herself, a cut ending of her now huge song Mr. Kill Myself included the audio of the last recording from a YouTuber who tragically committed suicide. There is some trivia surrounding Mr. Kill Myself, however. There was a cut ending which had the last recording ever made, apologising for what he would do. However, that was never released publicly and never will be, given that its use in the context of the song's title would be seen as me mocking him or trying to profit off his suicide. Out of respect, I'm not going to name this person directly and I've omitted them from any mentions, but if you know who they are, then you further understand how disgusting this is, especially considering the title and the fact that this individual had taken their life only a few months before Mr. Kill Myself was released. Sure, it's good that Sewerslvt had the foresight not to put them in, but for someone who was 19 at the time, that's kind of the bare minimum that's expected in emotional maturity or common sense. Alongside this, people also criticised Sewerslvt for the covers on her albums. Now, the one that everyone points to is a cover of an EP that apparently contains a picture of something that's been filtered to all hell, with people saying it's a painting of a or an actual picture of a or apparently CP. A lot of people point to this when criticising Sewerslvt. Personally, I'm not going anywhere near that. I'm not even going to look into it. If there's rumoured CP attached to that, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. To make things even worse, Sewerslvt also once told someone that she sampled CP in her album. This, according to her, is also fake and was done to seem edgy. On a more definitive level, Sewerslvt has put lolly porn in a few of their music covers. One of them is the cover for the album Starving Sluts Always Get Their Fix, and the other is a censored version for the single Siberia Layer 2. Both of these covers have since been removed after backlash. What's weird is that people have used the censorship of her album covers to show Sewerslvt changing and moving on from her views, but it's her behaviour that still puzzles me. On the 1st of February 2020, a few days after the release of her album Draining Love Story, she had this Twitter interaction. Yeah, even ones I like Sewerslvt, has some lolly imagery in one of their covers, though I don't know if it's ironic or not. Not something I'd do now. In hindsight, I wish I didn't do it, and I'd prefer not to push people away from my music. To answer your question about if it was irony or not, it wasn't. That was just to be edgy. That whole album was an edge fest, and I made it whilst I was going through some serious shit. But you know, people change. Yet only a couple of days after this, she retweeted actual lolly porn of a character, with again one of the pictures showing this character engaged in sexual activity. Even sectors of the breakcore audience didn't like Sewerslvt as she was coming up, because they thought and still think she's talentless because of her style of music. The best argument being made for this was in early 2020, when Sewerslvt published an EP containing a track called In Melancholy. But what people didn't realise until a few days later is that this was just a copy of a track made by two smaller artists named Foxy Decay and 4649 Nadeshiko. The only difference is that Sewerslvt's version just had more drums, which were louder. Again, it took some backlash from people on Twitter before Sewerslvt eventually changed it to give credit as a remix. Despite all of this, Sewerslvt was still regarded in their fanbase as a respected and talented musician from project to project, and they got more and more popular every year. Off the back of a number of well-received albums in 2019 and 2020, and many successful songs that managed to get into the algorithm, Sewerslvt was riding high off her newfound fame, and reached over 100,000 subscribers. She'd even managed to get a place on A2B2's Night of Fire, a prestigious experimental event hosted by Andy Morin, one of the members of Death Grips. Her popularity would go even higher after she made a remix of the song made by the K-pop group Luna, introducing the TikTok audiences to her music. But what got her to a peak of success would also lead to her largest controversy yet, as her newfound audience soon came across her old edgy albums from the Punk's Bakery era, especially the dreaded N-word album. A significant portion of Sewerslvt's audience would eat her alive for this, even through her constant apologies and contributing funds to charities. Eventually this ended up in her having a breakdown in November and posting this incoherent mess of words. As Sewerslvt was imploding, many users took notice of her behaviour online, especially her openness about being sexual in the timeline. She would be publicly consenting to cum tributes on porn of a character, announcing she was drawing Rule 34 on her Patreon, posting thigh and ass pics online to her social platforms, and announcing on Twitter that she took 4 hours to organise her folders of Rule 34 and hentai. Again, considering the claim made by Person A from Punk's Bakery, this might seem like a case of deja vu. The resurfacing of the old N-Word album was the real turning point for Sewerslvt's career. Even through the tons of support she was receiving and the consistent rise of her channel, there was a sizable amount of hate against her for different reasons. People from every side of the internet would begin to take note of her actions from here onwards, and she just couldn't take it. In February 2021, she would end up in a psych ward and took an extended break from the internet. Around this time, her fans would also set up like a Discord that was tied to the subreddit dedicated to her, but that didn't really help much as it was constantly forced to shut down, either from raids or just the toxic community that it housed. It was eventually brought to an end after relations with Sewerslvt later soured. A large part of why we've decided to go ahead with the rebranding of this Discord server is also due to Sewerslvt's behaviour. I'm personally aware of it due to the fact that I used to be in frequent contact with her. During that time, she has proven herself to be an incredibly manipulative and toxic person to be around. It's why I decided to cut ties with her a while ago. The attitude that Sewerslvt showed was overall very stingy and egocentric. In almost every single interaction I had with her, she struggled to talk about anything that didn't directly have to do with herself and her interests, which to a point is fine. I do the same things sometimes, but she genuinely came off as uncaring / cold towards anyone else. I remember her telling me multiple times about how she literally cannot bring herself to trust another human being. Hell, her view of the world in general is so insanely nihilistic to the point where it's impossible to take her seriously most of the time. Sewerslvt doesn't view her fans as people that respect and cherish her art. She treats them as people she can make feel sorry for her. Every single time I or anybody else tried to help her with her problems, she would automatically treat us as if we're fucking morons, or just outright ignorers. In my opinion, she seems to exaggerate the extent of her problems in order to garner sympathy from her fans. This isn't some shit I just decided to make up. Many others that have interacted with her hold the same opinion as I do. During my research, I talked to an anonymous musician who moderated for Sewerslvt's Discord, and when asking them about this server, they told me,
"That same year, I became a moderator in their server. They kinda just made me one on a whim, lol. And that was the moment where shit felt like I was in too deep now, and I cannot go back. It was more reason for me to stick around and also pay attention. I was not a big fan of public servers then, and that experience certainly did not make me any more of a fan now. I won't bore you with the details, but not only were her fans fucking annoying and parasocial for no good reason at all, but we also kept getting raided by 4chan types, spamming 40% jokes and whatnot. One good thing that came out of it is that I did meet a few good friends, they're whom I should add all over time collectively think Sewerslvt is cringe, so that's a win I guess."
Other rumours also started swirling around this time, although there is no evidence to back these up. One individual on Reddit claimed she messaged a former friend gross messages regarding self-harm. And whilst it is worth making very clear that this is a rumour and there's yet to be much proof, one of the other rumours was that she bragged about torturing animals, which as we've seen later turned out to be true. So I wouldn't immediately write off any of these claims considering what we've seen from her. Sewerslvt would only return to the internet in June 2021 with her album Schizophrenia Simulation, having recently deleted all of her social media apart from her YouTube and Patreon. She had finally changed her moniker from Junko to June, and intended for Schizophrenia Simulation to be her last album, but tragedy would strike only a couple of months later when Sewerslvt's partner took her own life. And just to make it clear, I've heard some people speculating on whether this person was actually real, but I have it on good authority that they did exist and this did all happen. Every source I've talked to, including the anonymous musician, have confirmed this.
After that, it's honestly a blur, at least until August 2021, when one of our dear friends and their girlfriend, Angel, passed away. If I'm not mistaken, it was either the 6th or the 5th when I received the news from one of our friends. There was a whole online funeral event set up and everything, and pardon me for going off topic here, but it's honestly fucking disgusting how sometimes I'd see armchair detectives try to debunk their existence. It just sucks. If you want proof, I can screenshot the very last thing she sent me. I don't care as long as it proves to these fucking idiots that she's not this made up thing. That's part of where my main disdain for June comes from, but to be fair, I'm not sure how much you can put the blame on somebody for making a tribute album for their loved one and having the internet take it and twist the facts.
This event was mentally destroying for Sewerslvt as it would be for anyone else, and it led her to come back and create one more album called We Had Good Times Together, Don't Forget That. And after that, she disappeared from the internet. Despite everything surrounding her, Sewerslvt's music and legacy has persisted, with her channel still getting consistent growth and listeners to this day. If the story ended here, this video probably wouldn't have been made, but as you can see, that was not the case. In January 2022, a couple of months after Sewerslvt vanished from the internet, a grooming allegation sprung up from an anonymous user who went by Gwa. Gwa and Sewerslvt first met on Instagram, although the circumstances of their friendship starting aren't entirely clear. Gwa was a fan of Sewerslvt's music prior to this, and they became friends in around late January 2020, as seen from an old screenshot of the DMs posted on Instagram stories. Unfortunately, this is the only evidence to prove that they talked on Instagram, as Sewerslvt's account was deleted whilst Gwa was gathering her evidence, but this is far from the last screenshot that proves these details. DMs. In their Instagram conversation on the 1st and 2nd of February 2020, Sewerslvt starts talking about porn with Gwa, having not even asked for her age yet. Then she asks for her age, where she confirms she is 16. At this point, according to all online records, Sewerslvt would have been 19. Sewerslvt continues talking about porn and asks for Gwa to send some, to which she complies but also notes she's in a relationship. Sewerslvt continues talking about a porn addiction, saying, "I struggle with it though. You have no idea how I get when I'm like this. It's literally like a junkie without meth." Sewerslvt later follows that up by offering her Discord tag to Gwa, saying, "Appreciate how lewd you are. Would date you in a second if I could, not to be a creep or cunt. And you're all good, still a cutie, and I'm glad to have you here." From here, we move to their conversations on Discord, picking up in the early hours of February 1st. Again, I know that Sewerslvt is only represented as a deleted user here, but I'm gonna ask you to bear with me here. The links will start turning up pretty soon. The first thing of note here is Sewerslvt apparently sending a picture of her face with a wig on. Gwa alleges that Sewerslvt would show her face several times whilst on facecam with her, but obviously though it's hard to prove this as Sewerslvt has never really shown her face. On the 2nd of February, Sewerslvt sends lolly porn of a character to Gwa, and if you remember, it's in the exact same art style as this retweet, which we mentioned earlier. In fact, this picture was sent to the exact same day that this tweet was retweeted by Sewerslvt. The following DMs then talk about how Gwa sounds like Sewerslvt's girlfriend, Sewerslvt again flirting by saying that she would fuck Gwa if she had the option, them talking about buying nudes, and them discussing and sending lolicon, mentioning the character Nagatoro from the manga Don't Toy With Me, Miss Nagatoro. On the 4th of February, Sewerslvt talks about how Cheru is going to do art for her, referring to Cheru Doodles, an NSFW artist who later worked with Sewerslvt on the song Cheru's Theme. After Gwa asks Sewerslvt about who Chero is, she responds with porn she drew and posted on the 29th of January 2020. From then onwards, they talk again about porn, as well as Sewerslvt giving Gwa advice on how to improve drawing. On the same day, Gwa asks about her pirating thing with FL Studio, and Sewerslvt tells her what to do. Again, worth noting, because Sewerslvt has publicly stated that she made her album Drowning in the Sewer using FL Studio. From then on, they continue talking about porn again, and Sewerslvt also again says that Gwa sounds like her girlfriend. Moving ahead, the next conversation is on the 6th of February, as Sewerslvt complains to Gwa about her issues with payment, as she could not withdraw the $2,000 of her earning on her PayPal account, and Gumroad were restricting her payments. Again, this correlates with a tweet that Sewerslvt posted later, talking about her financial issues with multiple platforms. The DMs continue throughout this day, with Sewerslvt remarking how they want to fuck the pain away, and Sewerslvt saying this to Gwa: "If I could, I'd touch you, but you know." On the 16th of February, Sewerslvt tries to demand Gwa to have some sort of a sexual interaction online, assumedly phone sex, as Gwa testifies. Originally, Gwa agrees, but then she shows some sort of hesitancy as she wants to stay loyal to their partner, to which Sewerslvt acknowledges that but still keeps the offer up. Then she says, "Just sorta sucks that we just can't fuck," and responds to Gwa talking about her breasts by saying, "Nice, good for gropes." Later that day, she also talks about wanting a Nagatoro girlfriend, and saying that Gwa looks a lot like her, but she wouldn't be hers. The next interaction is back on Instagram on the 26th of February, where Sewerslvt vents about a job, not being able to make rent, and possibly being evicted. The next conversation is on the 4th of March, where Gwa opens up to Sewerslvt about sexual abuse during her early life. Sewerslvt gives her advice and listens, but the conversation kinda turns to a discussion about what these people mean to each other in their lives. Sewerslvt laments about what makes her special to Gwa, turns it around and starts venting about her life being shit, and eventually she leaves with Gwa having to give her advice. On the 7th of March, Sewerslvt would tweet out talking about her financial issues, and she would start her Patreon. And on the exact same day, Gwa would congratulate her on starting her Patreon. A few weeks later, on the 23rd of March, Sewerslvt posted a track with Chero Doodles, which is again referred to in the DMs as Cherry's part of the collaboration was drawing porn of Sewerslvt. She then talks about porn again, as well as her current job status and going to the welfare office. The next conversation on the 31st of March shows Gwa sending lolly porn and Sewerslvt saying it looks like her. Sometime after the 16th of April, in the last Instagram DMs we have, Gwa congratulated Sewerslvt on the release of a new compilation, Worthless and Selected. On the 29th of April, Sewerslvt sends a picture of her ass to Gwa, as seen from this conversation where they talk about it, and Sewerslvt says, "For $500, I'll send the best pics." The conversations continue, but there's not really much to note here, just them, again, talking about their jobs, personal life, hopes and aspirations. On the 2nd of May, Sewerslvt again talks about her ass pictures, as she's flirting with Gwa and they joke about reselling her nudes. On May 3rd, Sewerslvt congratulated Gwa on her birthday, and on May 16th, Sewerslvt herself turned 20, meaning the age gap is still 3 years, it's just from now on it's 17-20. And it's at this moment where things start to get more risky. On July 15, Sewerslvt messages Gwa on Twitter, seemingly offering to fly her out to Australia. Quote, "If you're able, I'll fly you out for a bit if you want." These screenshots are some of the most solid proof we've seen yet, as seen through the to the fact that it's a Twitter message through email notifications, and there's a lot more of them as seen here. On the same day, Sewerslvt and Gua talk on Discord, where Sewerslvt compliments Gua's haircut and flirts with her again. She talks about her job status again. On September 17th, 2020, Sewerslvt messages Gua on Twitter saying the following: "I do miss you and wish we'd do shit together, but you're making me want you so bad right now. Is it okay for me to ask for pics or whatever?" And they had their last conversation in October 2020. Now already there's a lot of links between these DMs, the timing of these messages, and Sewerslvt's public tweets. But if there's one thing here that really solidified for me, it wasn't the Twitter DM emails or how many Discord DMs there are here, it's this. Let's go all the way back to the 23rd of March, where Sewerslvt talks to Gua about the welfare office she's at. So, where is it? Well, it's Modbury, Adelaide. Assuming all these DMs are real and there's no cut context from Instagram or Twitter, I'm fairly confident in saying this is fucking grooming behaviour. It's not initially apparent from the 3-year age gap, but when you really look into this, it's clear how big of a difference there is between these two in maturity. In these DMs, Sewerslvt is talking about a housing situation, finances and job situation, whilst Gua is talking about a maths homework. And that's alongside the constant affinity for lolicon, flirting with a minor and comparing that minor to lolly porn. Not only that, but the multiple gifts that Sewerslvt offers to Gua, such as nudes, a flight out to Australia, I mean even just the fact that she's taking down a veil of anonymity and talking about her secrets and personal life, it's an allure for a mega fan like Gua, and all of this added together creates a disgusting picture. So why has it taken this long for people to notice? Well, one of the big reasons for this is that a lot of the evidence against Sewerslvt was posted to Kiwi Farms, a website I've talked about before and one I briefly mentioned in this video. For those unaware, Kiwi Farms is an online forum made for talking about internet personalities or lolcows. It's also a site where everything is allowed, which has gained the site a reputation for transphobia and gathering doxes, among other things. And the common sentiment among Sewerslvt's fans is that stuff from Kiwi Farms is false because they're transphobic, and this is their motive to fabricate evidence against trans people to make them look bad. But to say that this evidence is fake with barely any other excuse other than it's from Kiwi Farms doesn't make sense. We're talking about around 1,500 messages on Discord, some of which line up with tweets that Sewerslvt has made, alongside messages sent on different platforms. I think it's pretty unlikely that these are faked. And I'm sorry, there's just a really obvious point that I have to make here. If someone was faking this information against Sewerslvt, why would they not put a username in most of the screenshots? Who fakes evidence against someone by putting deleted user as the person speaking? The bottom line is, you can absolutely despise Kiwi Farms, but that will not invalidate that the evidence they hold in the situation is damning. But who am I kidding? I bet someone's just going to try and write this whole video off because I use them as a source. Other defenses include people bringing up that the age of consent in Australia is 16, so it's fine, when I think it's more relevant to look at this from a moral perspective rather than a legal one. In fact, bringing up the age of consent only makes Sewerslvt look worse. Whilst Australia's age of consent is 16, the state of South Australia, where she lived at the time, has an age of consent of 17. This makes it look like Sewerslvt waited until Gua turned 17 to offer her an opportunity to fly out and presumably have sex. As of writing this, Sewerslvt has just returned to the internet after years of silence. They're back under the name of Symphony, to again much applause as well as a lot of negative comments. Even if this video wasn't made, Sewerslvt's troubled past is going to inevitably chase them for the rest of their online career, no matter how many rebrands they'll make. You can always preach about how much of a changed individual you are, but there are just some actions that you will have to live with. One of the only valid points to make against Gua's allegations was that they were only posted after Sewerslvt left the internet. But considering they're back, I think we're due an explanation of some sorts, whether that's a total debunking or an admission and apology to those affected. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay toasty.